What made Led Zeppelin so unique as a band were the four individuals who made up the band.
Each of them was very, very, very good at what he did. Now, that doesn't guarantee that when you put four people together who are very good at what they do individually, that the combination will work. But good Lord, it jolly well did.
None of us really knew anything about how good we were individually. And that didn't really seem to matter. What mattered was the fact that together we had moments when we earned a big grin.
Everyone was inspired in that band. Everyone was a star, you know. There wasn't a weakness there, you know. Every single person was strong. And the chemistry of the four people put together was, well, we know what it is now.
There's a corny word that's used a lot called chemistry. A lot of people use it. It's used in articles and a lot of people always say it, but this is very true, you know, that we possess when we walk out onto that stage an affinity, the four of us, one to each other, that I don't see very often.
We knew we were appreciated by the fact that people were coming along to see us in such great vast numbers, but no one expected this.
Led Zeppelin seemed to arrive from nowhere, but the sheer power and exuberance of this fledgling band grabbed the listener by the throat and told the whole world that something new and quite remarkable had happened. The greatest band in the history of rock had just been born.
Well, you may go to college, you may go to school, you may have a pink Cadillac, but don't you be nobody's fool.
The record that made me want to play guitar was Baby Let's Play House, Presley. I thought, you know, I just heard sort of two guitars and a bass and thought, yeah, that's it, I want to be part of it.
Talking about, come on back to meet the little girl so we can play some house.
There was a rock and roll band forming at school, and they didn't want a piano player. All they wanted was drums or bass. I thought, I can't get the drums on the bus. Bass looked easy, 4 strings, no chord. Easy, so I took up the bass guitar.
It was just the obvious influences at the beginning. Scotty Moore, James Burton. And those seemed to be the most, you know, the most sustaining influences. Until one heard sort of Elmore James, B.B. King, people like that.
I've been in blues bands since I was 15 years old, so as naive as it may have been, I was with other people who had a like attitude. So they were thinking and listening to the blues, Big Bill Brunsey, Lead Belly, Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee, a lot of country blues, and then exposed to the city blues of the Howlin' Wolf, Little Walter stuff, you know, Buddy Guy. Yeah, I mean, blues was had an incredible resurgence in the mid-60s in Britain.
I don't know, I was 14 years old, I think, something like that, when I was at school. I was about the beginning of it. Played in a school pantomime, and then it just sort of materialised from there, you know. Left school and we formed small groups and things like that, you know, and played locally and everything. You'd play anything from the latest hit by the Hollies to sort of, you know, to something by a blues artist. It was that, you know, that sort of thing you've got to do, you know, to survive, really, to play locally anyway. And that was about it then, because we, you know, didn't do any writing or anything in those days. I sort of stretched out a lot more when I started doing studio work. I had to. But you could be doing a film session one night, and then there'd be something like a rock band, and then maybe a folk one in the evening. You didn't know what was coming, and you know, I just really had to stretch out on all the different styles, you know.
We used to do Tom Jones sessions, Kathy Kirby, we used to do Herman's Hermits and all that. I mean, they were never there, you know. We do a whole album in a day. And it was great fun. We had a lot of laughs.
Zeppelin was a hallmark band because they had the perfect elements at the perfect time in the perfect place.
The secret of Led Zeppelin's success lay in the four amazingly talented individuals who made up the band. Jimmy Page was a seasoned session player with an immaculate grasp of musical form. John Paul Jones was a gifted bass player, also an arranger of outstanding ability with a huge technical knowledge of musical theory. Robert Plant, with a voice from heaven and the looks of a Greek god, was the perfect frontman. John Bonham was the powerhouse drummer with the unique individual style, who has never been surpassed, ever, by anybody.
Jonesy called me up and said, "Oh, you're getting a band together." He said, "I'd really like to be part of it." And obviously we knew each other from the session days.
I was moping around the house one day, and my missus said to me, "Will you stop moping around the house? Why don't you join a band or something?" And I said, "I don't know bands I want to join." "Come on, what are you talking about?" She said, "Well, look, I think we did disc." She said, "I've come across this." She said, "It's a Jimmy Page is forming a group because he just left the Yardbirds." And she said, "Why don't you give him a ring, Oh, right. So I just rang him up and said, "Jim," I said, how are you doing with the group, He said, "Well, I haven't got anybody yet." I said, "Well, if you want a bass player, give me a ring."
I had in my mind exactly what I wanted to try and get together, and then it was just a matter of searching around for the right personnel that could pull it off. By that I mean, for the sort of work that I'd managed to expand around the Yardbirds material, because there was a lot of areas in there for improvisation, and I'd come up with a lot of riffs of my own, and ideas, and passages and movements and things. So my first choice is either Steve Marriott or Terry Reid. Steve Marriott was already involved in something. Terry Reid actually put me on to Robert, and once I heard him sing, I was pretty impressed.
How many more times? Treat me the way that you want to do.
He came to see me, I was playing in a band, and he came up to me and he said, "Where's Robert Plant?" And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I've come up to see him." I said, "Well, who are you?" And he said, "Jimmy Page." I said, "Who are you then?" I was one of those sort of things. He thought I was the roadie, and I wasn't going to tell him I knew who he was.
Will you be mad with me, baby? Please.
I wanted somebody who could really belt out the blues and, rock really, but blues, but also be able to handle other, the subtleties as well. So it needed somebody with a really, really good vocal range and power.
Well, I was 19. I was fed up at fixing the roads and working on a Saturday and a Sunday, it was nice to meet anybody and when I heard him play, it was such a celebration. It was great. He's somebody who could play the blues with an attitude that wasn't just black. It was very much London art school, that kind of attitude, the kind of aggressive, angular thing.
I'll give you all I've got to give.
At the time, I had a couple of drummers in mind, but Robert said, "I know a really good drummer in the Midlands, Bonzo." He was just exactly the type of drummer I was looking for. Eventually, we managed to get the four of us into one room, and that was it.
We first played together in a small room in Gerrard Street, in a basement room in what is now Chinatown, and it was just wall-to-wall amplifiers, just Marshalls sort of. And there was a space for the door, and that was it. And literally, we just everybody looking at each other. "Oh, what should we play?" So there was an old Yardbirds number called "The Train Kept A-Rolling," which Jimmy said, "Well, it's just like it's in E, and you go down, digga, da, dang, digga, dang, digga. Right, so 3, 4, 5, and wow, the whole room had just exploded. Silly grins and "Oh, yeah, this is it, man. Yes." It was pretty bloody obvious actually. it was going to work. From the first number.
We were in a tiny weeny room with all this equipment, not really knowing what on earth we'd do and what on earth it would be like, and we just started playing. It was like powerful stuff,
although I had in mind a very powerful drummer, I wasn't ready for John Bonham. I must say he was beyond the realms of anything that I could possibly have imagined, It's absolutely phenomenal.
So we started under the name of the New Yardbirds, because nobody else would book us under anything else, oh, who the hell are they? Oh, Jimmy, well, we know Jimmy Page, and we know the Yardbirds. You're going to have to be the New Yardbirds. And we rehearsed an act, an album, and a tour.
The first album took about 36 hours or something like that. In actual hours. Obviously it wasn't, go in the studio and work for 36 hours. It was over a period. But when it was all added up, it was that amount of time. I knew by the studio bill. but we had actually played these numbers live, because there were a few dates to fulfill from the Yardbirds, and we went over and fulfilled those, and went in and recorded, and then of course we changed the name.
The name Led Zeppelin was coined by Keith Moon, which was originally going to be for a band that recorded a thing called Beck's Bolero, which was Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, Nicky Hopkins, myself and Keith Moon. And then the thought of it all going on the road, I thought, was sort of fairly horrific. Quite a bunch of characters, as you could probably imagine. And so that never came about, but we remembered the name and asked if we could use it.
Despite the fact that the band had only a limited repertoire of original songs, the four musicians shared a love for blues and rock and roll classics. So Zeppelin could quite happily play a 2 or 3 hour set, which drove audiences into frenzy. Those early shows already featured an amazing version of Dazed and Confused. Zeppelin featured this track on a few television shows, which they did record. As a band, Zeppelin were clearly not comfortable in the TV studio. Peter Grant quickly decided that the television medium was just not suited to his protégés, and promptly withdrew from television appearances altogether.
It felt like I don't know, we just found something that we had to be very careful with this thing that we'd found, because we might lose it. But it was remarkable, just the power. And I was very intimidated. I don't know, maybe I had a complex, or maybe I was just neurotic or paranoid or something like that, but I thought, this is all too much. Am I really here? Do I belong in this sketch? And so really the record feels like that for me, for my contribution. But it really, as a collection of tunes and a way to play and expand, it was great.
Well, in England when Led Zeppelin started off, they were playing like not very big venues, the regular sort of R&B, rhythm and blues type venues, the same venues that John Mayall would be playing, or Bloodwind Pig or Fleetwood Mac or Chicken Shack or whatever. Nothing extraordinary. In America, when they started off, they were supporting Vanilla Fudge, who'd had this huge big hit with Inagada Davida, which up to that point in time was Atlantic Records' biggest selling album. But the thing is, here's suddenly Jimmy Page and his band of merry men, and they wiped the floor with these American chaps.
I knew it was really good, what we were doing. Good Lord, I knew it was good. We did a few dates in England, quite a few actually, and I don't know what the undercurrent was, but it was just like, yeah, they're okay. But it wasn't until we got over here and played at, I think it was a Fillmore, that suddenly we went in must have gone in right at the right time.
I remember the first night in San Francisco. Incredible, the atmosphere was unbelievable. And I couldn't believe any of it. I go, what are all these people cheering for? Oh yeah, must be us, I suppose. Ain't nobody else up here,
We only had one guy looking after the band, driving the station wagon. So I did the PA as well. So I had to change the volume of the voice from the stage. So nobody had any idea of whether the voice was loud enough or not. You just took pot luck. And I've heard bootlegs from San Francisco, from the Fillmore, and it's terrible. It's terrible, because I'm still fiddling around with this amplifier with its treble and its bass control thing, which I bought with me from the Band of Joy, which is totally inadequate and probably about as loud as the television set is these days. Well, it was about 150 watts, and now you don't even play without 1,500 watts at a rehearsal, or whatever it is, So, it must have been a very funny sight. This guy with no shoes on in his wedding suit, pirouetting around, pulling all sorts of funny faces and also controlling the level of his own voice from a box which was placed in front of the bass drum, which was the amplifier. It was great.
I always remember the first review of the first album in Rolling Stone, where they just sort of dismissed it out of hand, completely out. I don't even think the bloke would listen to it, and said as much.
Now, the critics were lukewarm, but we played a storm. We had queues right 3 times around the block and stuff like that, playing in small clubs. It was big, it was real hot.
Within a very short space of time, the band took off in America. This was thanks in no small part to the business sense and the guile, the cunning and the charm, and the force of will from their manager Peter Grant.
The chemistry to make Led Zeppelin work was a combination of experience, brass neck, of course incredible talent, and the look and the presence to carry it off. You had the experience of Page and Jones, you had the brass neck of Peter Grant, who went off to Atlantic Records. He wants 5 times the royalties that the Beatles are getting. He wants a $200,000 advance. He wants complete artistic control right down to sleeve design, everything. No interference from the company. And crucially, because they were such fans of soul music as well as the blues, the rock acts on Atlantic went through their Atco division record label. Led Zeppelin wanted to be the first rock act on Atlantic who would be on the Atlantic imprint. And Ertegun and Wexler very wisely said yes to everything.
With Atlantic, they wanted Jimmy Page because he had a name with the Yardbirds, but they didn't know who Led Zeppelin was, you know. So when the deal was first brokered, it was about signing Page. But when he said, well, I've got a group and we're going to call it Led Zeppelin and it's a 4-man group and this is what it is, then it changed a bit. And Atlantic were actually they weren't certain about signing Zeppelin. There was, you know, a couple of weeks, I think, where what are we going to do? And obviously Grant was holding out for a very big deal. It was $200,000, which was the biggest deal of the time.
You know, to put it into perspective, in 1968, a huge advance in America would have been $20,000. That would have been considered lavish. To go to New York and come back with $200,000 was almost daylight robbery. He knew he had the product. Ultimately, he knew Led Zeppelin were the goods. He knew Jimmy was the guy. And Jimmy, for his part, knew that there wasn't going to be any other manager in the world that could do for him what Peter Grant did. And so when Jimmy said he wanted to put out albums that had no name, that's what they did.
I only had one idea, which was a picture which actually appears very tiny on one of the later album covers, a little tiny logo at the bottom, which was a kind of picture of sea and clouds and a Zeppelin, very like Milton Glaser, who was my graphic hero at that point, and copied from an old tin sign in America. Well, when I'd done the roughs, I rang, I suppose, Stephen Goldblatt and said, what happens next? And he said, well, you had to show them to the band. And I said, well, I hope you're coming along to hold my hand. And he said, no, I'm not, you just go. And it's in Oxford Street and at top of a building, Rack Records. And then I went on up to the office and I sat down, and the band were there, not Jimmy Page, but four others. Obviously very nervous, and then Jimmy Page arrived, and I met Peter Grant, but Jimmy Page said no, and I mean, he hardly looked at it, you know. He just brought out the book of photographs and said, no, this is what we're going to have. We'd like you to do this. So I said yes, and went away and did it, pretty much. obviously the best thing would have been for my original idea to be accepted, but it wasn't. But then you have the possibility of making money, which you're otherwise doing, working in a pub or something. So you want that. So faced with this photograph, one thing was I didn't in those days know how to get copyright for something like that. I mean, I'd know how to do it now. And also I knew that if I did that, I wouldn't get any money. I would just be finding out for them how to use a photograph and putting a bit of type on. So a way round it was to make a copy of the photograph with my own fair hand, and then that would solve the problem. I can't remember whether it was £60 or $60, but I've got a feeling it was $60 because I know I put it in a New York bank account because it seemed like a really flash thing to do at the time. You know, probably bought my first invoice book, and you know, which would have been a little one with carbon paper in it, and sent them an invoice after hours of conversation with Stephen Goldblatt and other people about what I could get away with, you know. So it probably was carefully worked out, but it wasn't. There wasn't a fix. No, they didn't have an idea. I just guessed what I'd get. But $60 was good in those days.
A friend came over and he said, "You have to hear this new record by this band Led Zeppelin." And I looked at the cover and I thought, wow, this cover is unbelievable. And we put on the album, and the first track was Good Times, Bad Times. And we could not believe what we were hearing. We never heard anything like that. We never heard a drummer play like that. Bonham's bass drum was unbelievable. The sound of Page's guitars, it was just, we heard about this band. This was a new English supergroup, and we'd heard Cream. We knew about Cream, but when my buddy brought this record over, he says, "You're not going to believe it." It was a moment in time that it got to me.
I had an idea of exactly what I wanted to do with the first album and the band. There's a lot of contrast on the album, and that's one of the things that I really wanted to get together, which I didn't think anyone else was doing, and that was the. But then again, you know, that's the way it shaped up. But fortunately, it shaped up the way that I hoped it was going to.
The first Led Zeppelin album came together very quickly and was really recorded within a matter of weeks of getting the material together that's featured on there. They had a tour of Scandinavia around September '68. They came back and went into the studios in October, and really the purpose of the tour was to take the material out, test it in front of an audience, see what worked well, discard what didn't work so well, and then come back with the ability to go in and make an album fairly quickly.
They did it in about 10 days. The whole thing cost less than £2,000. Glyn Johns, the producer, remembers that of the 9 or 10 days it took, they were probably in the studio for less than 30 hours. So they did record it as live. There was no kind of come in and do the drums and we'll come back tomorrow and do the bass. They just stood in the studio and played.
That's the essence of it. It's live performance. It's the real feel of the whole thing. It's not something that's been procrastinated over for months. It's let's go in and play rock and roll. And the vitality of that shines as much now as it did 40 years ago.
I think everything about the album was really thought out. The sequencing, the production, the fact that Good Times, Bad Times opened it up was an enormous calling card. I mean, Bonham's drums, famously, there's that double bass drum kick on that track, which for musicians and other drummers was an astonishing feat. You know, the drummer from hell, where did he come from?
I remember Hendrix one night coming up to Bonzo in a club in New York. And in those days, everybody used to jam, and it was a place called Steve Paul's Scene. There was Buddy Miles and Hendrix, Beck. There was loads of us, me, Rod Stewart, people all over the place. And he came over to Bonzo and he said, "You know what?" He said, "You got a foot like a rabbit," because Bonzo's bass drum was so... And we used to take the mickey out of people who used double bass drums because Bonzo just said, "What you want two for?"
Without Bonzo, the band wouldn't have meant anything at all. Sure, I mean, he was the emulsifying agent, he was everything, he was the whole core of the thing. He was the guy who stopped it being just another rock band, really. At least in its performance, the writing. I mean, Jimmy's approach was so unique and is so unique. But I mean, Bonzo's whole delivery was the thing that made it what it is.
As an opening track, Good Times, Bad Times works really well because the first thing you have is this bump, bump, the rhythm section comes in, we've stated something and left a little pause, and then again, and then it just builds into the vocals, really strong singing, then the guitar break. It's something that, it kind of takes you by the hand and introduces you to what Led Zeppelin do, almost, an introduction to the orchestra, as it were.
You know, they nail their colours to the mast from the very beginning. You know, this is not a band who are sort of shy about their sound or unsure about what they're doing. You know, this is an unbelievably confident swagger. And it's, you know, this is us, and love it or lump it.
Well, Good Times, Bad Times is a brilliant introduction to the album and the band itself. Whereas most bands would just be happy to play 3 simple chords, E, D and A. What Jimmy does is takes those chords and works a riff into them. So most bands would sound like... But what Jimmy does, when he gets to the D, rather than just playing the simple bar chord, he picks the notes out from within the bar chord to give it a sense of space. And rather than going straight to the A chord and just playing that as a bar chord as well, he sort of picks notes out from that as well to give it an embellishment. Back to the start of the original riff, and when those are all combined, it gives a real sense of groove and space into the riff.
There's an enormous amount of kind of emotion in there, a lot of kind of raw passion, quite sexual, a lot of sexual energy coming across. It stops you in your tracks when you first hear it. I mean, Plant's voice was rough.
He had been very seasoned in the blues and in West Coast rock. And I think when you put that together, there was a lot of texture in his voice. The thing with Robert at the time, he committed himself so much to a song. You know, when you heard Robert Plant get involved in a song, you heard him involved in it in such a way that he lived it. And I think that's what came out of the early Led Zepp days again. He was given the freedom to sing how he wanted. Jimmy never said, "This is how I want you to sing."
We're looking at the first album, and it's, you know, it's a mixture of, there's blues on it, and there's acoustic music, and you've got Black Mountainside instrumental, which is finger picking, and then you've got the extension of that type of thing with Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, which starts with the acoustic, but it also has all this, you know, high power accents on it as well, electric accents, and very dramatic quality, you know. I mean, I still think that holds up, you know. I think they will hold up.
Baby, baby, I'm gonna leave you. I said, baby, baby, I'm really gonna leave you.
Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You. I heard that on a Joan Baez album. That's the version that I played to him, but I said, look, I've got an idea of how to do this. And so in other words, I had all the arrangement for that in my head.
I can hear it calling me back home. Babe, 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 you know I've got to rumble.
Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You is the start of the light and shade sound that Page was after, and it supposedly is one of the songs he played to Robert Plant when he was giving him the idea of the band. It starts off with an acoustic. I'll play that again. Which you need fingernails for, mine are all broken. Which is a lovely finger-pricked descending chord sequence, and then once again he uses octaves to fill out the riff. Now the riff to it, when it breaks in, follows the same chord progression, But instead of being nice, gentle finger-picked chords, you get this. Which is all descending down in octaves, which I don't think, and someone will probably correct me, I don't think any other guitarists were doing at the time. It's a different technique.
Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You was perfect for Plant's early vocals. I mean, he had the vibrancy of, being able to get the top end, the bottom end, and it had a lot of emotion in it.
No one can sound like Robert Plant. It's that shivers down the spine voice. Nobody sounds like it. And the first album, it must have just knocked people off the seats in the 60s when they heard that.
Robert Plant was a unique vocalist that I don't think there's anyone like Robert Plant, and he wasn't afraid to fall on his face. And you can hear that now, and when it works, it's just spellbinding.
I'm not joking about it, baby. I really mean it, girl. I've got to remember.
There's an air of romanticism about it, but obviously with the hard edge of the band, that sort of it took away any sort of sugary sweetness that it might otherwise have found.
What makes this so special, of course, is that they were just starting out, and just to hear it sometimes sends shivers down your spine.
I told you now I hear it calling me the way it used to do.
Jimmy had heard Joan Baez do in a straight folk sort of style. When he met up with Robert, he played him that track, and it was quite weird that Plant already knew it. And they said together, we could make something of this. We could make it really dynamic and very loud, but at the same time very soft. And that's where you get the acoustic guitars coming in, and the whole arrangement stretches out. And it was the beginning of that, and the beginning of something that Zeppelin was going to take much further on, in subsequent albums. But I think Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You set the sort of template of the light and shade of Led Zeppelin, which was something Page and Plant created just by having that first meeting.
Oh, I can hear it calling me back home.
I think it's one of the best tracks on the album still. It holds up incredibly well. It works perfectly as a piece of music, but it's so completely, the sections are so completely different. It took some real skill to kind of hold a piece of music like that together.
Baby, 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 I'm gonna leave you. I said, baby, 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 I'm really gonna leave you.
Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck had been together in the Yardbirds. And although there was a lot of friendship there was also strong rivalry there too. When Jeff Beck took You Shook Me on the road, it became one of the showstoppers in his live performance set. And he had his first Jeff Beck group album with Rod Stewart singing the song on it. And then he was playing at Fillmore East in New York, and Peter Grant, Led Zeppelin manager, and Jimmy Page turned up to join the tour and see what Jeff was up to. And Jimmy had tapes of the first Led Zeppelin album with him. And he decided to play Jeff their version, the Zeppelin version of You Shook Me. And the way that Jeff related it was that he just sat there nearly speechless and said, Jim, what? And then he said tears of rage came because he felt that it was just Jimmy trying to upstage him.
Jeff Beck's version lasts for under 3 minutes. Okay, you know, it was a good track. Obviously, Rod Stewart on vocals, but the Zeppelin version is 6 minutes long. What they were good at is taking an old blues tune and making it their own. Zeppelin borrowed, sampled, nicked, call it what you will, a lot of riffs from the blues era, often without credit, you know, which wasn't probably the right thing to do. But the fundamental thing about it, every time they did that and put it into, you know, their arrangements, it came out sounding nothing like nothing else. It was them.
You don't know how I feel.
Jeff Beck didn't have Robert Plant as a singer, and the Jeff Beck Truth album is a good record. It's a great record, and you can hear he's heading in a similar direction, but it's not the same. You know, basically Page stole a march on Jeff Beck here because he basically put together a far better band, and the whole package was there. Essence of it sounds very different because of the heaviness of it, but I think in the reality of the delivery, the forcefulness of it, and the visceral kind of way it hits you, it is close in spirit to the real, genuine Chicago blues guys, and I suspect that they would probably have warmed to it, although whether they would have warmed entirely to the copyright notations on the original record labels, I'm not so sure.
Jimmy was the producer of Led Zeppelin. He was the one who said, we're not just going to do a cover of these songs, we're going to make them our own. You know, this whole business of, oh, they stole them and didn't credit them. No, they reinvented them. They reinterpreted them. That isn't Willie Dixon's song you hear on the album anymore, it's Led Zeppelin's.
Babe, when I think I'm gonna put you down for a little while, I can't quit you, babe. I think I'm gonna put you down for a while.
I Can't Quit You Baby, which is, you know, the other Willie Dixon tune on the album, which had been much played, you know, that had been gone through the blues clubs, and certainly Jimmy had played it before. But again, the expansiveness of the sound, Bonham's drumming, the whole element that, you know, this is a blues tune, but we can give it our own technique, and I think that's what they did, and it always came out sounding fresh. Whatever blues tune they did, however they wrapped it up, it came out pure Zeppelin, which is quite a contradiction, you know, in terms, but that's what it did, and no further examples than those two tracks on Led Zeppelin 1.
They made those songs their own. You listen to I Can't Quit You Baby, you know, they stamped their mark on all of those songs. I don't think it was a problem at all to anyone buying the record that not everything in there was the original material. You could level the criticism at Led Zeppelin that they were responsible for pasting their names onto other people's work. I think quite a bit of that came from Peter Grant's aggressive management style and the idea that, well, we put our names on it and then they can come after us. We're invincible. On the other hand, there's a great expression, the folk process. And I like this idea because it is true that everything comes from somewhere else. And people have
laid criticism onto Led Zeppelin that, for example, Jimmy Page ripped the idea of playing the guitar with a bow from Eddie Phillips of The Creation. Now, not to malign Eddie Phillips, he was a fantastic guitarist, great innovator, but was he completely original in applying a bow to strings? He, in turn, had watched Jacqueline du Pré, who was a classical cellist, but in the 60s, she was as exciting a live performer in her sphere as Jimi Hendrix was with an electric guitar. So Eddie Phillips is watching this young girl, hair flying all over the place, getting into this cello with a bow and going, wow, I wonder what would happen if we did that with an electric guitar.
Thank you very much. This is a number called Dazed and Confused.
I think if there's one song that sort of bears the hallmarks of the future sound, I mean, in a way, but also shows us the promise for the future, I think that has to be Dazed and Confused. I mean, I think that sort of says, this is what we're capable of now, but boy, you wait till the future.
I've been dazed and confused so long it's not true. I wanted a woman, never bargained for you. Sweet little baby, say what you will. Don't like so much when I send you the bill.
Dazed and Confused was an early anthem. It came out of the Yardbirds, actually. It was something that Page had heard initially by another folk singer called Jake Holmes, who did a track called I'm Confused. He saw it with him in the mid-60s when he was on tour with the Yardbirds. The Yardbirds started to do an arrangement of it. He then took it much further with Zeppelin.
If you ever hear the Yardbirds do it, or Keith Relf singing, it doesn't sound anywhere near as good as it does now. I mean, it's something that Robert Plant really stamped his own mark on that track.
Everything was going and firing off in all directions. There was lots of tangents musically. Well, I started developing the use of my voice to match in with what Jimmy was doing with the guitar, you know. I mean, it's all a long time ago now, but I know that it was quite a moment when we suddenly started phrasing and scatting together on Dazed and Confused.
I wanna love you, baby. I got no words.
There are lots of stories about how Jimmy Page first came to use a violin bow, but in fact it goes back to his session days. David McCallum, who used to play Ilya Kuryakin in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., his father was a session violinist, and in fact he was doing a session with Jimmy one day, or the two of them were there at the same session, and he just asked Jimmy out of the blue, bored one moment, have you ever thought about using a violin bow on the guitar?
I said, no, I haven't. I said, well, I don't think it'd be very easy because, you know, like a violin has got an arched neck, so to speak, and an arched bridge. The guitar doesn't, you see. But he said, well, have a go, and I tried it. And in fact, that was the thing that gave me the idea to do it.
If you just take the bow and rub it flush along a string, there's no sort of friction from an electric guitar string because it's a metal string and there's no surfaces creating friction. It's a smooth surface. You're not going to get any sound. So Jimmy realized that if you turn the bow a little bit and hit the string, if this is the top of the string, and you hit the bow at an angle, that's how you're going to get it to create friction on the very side of the bow. So when he realized that, he was off to the races. And by placing it in different places, over the pickup, near the bridge, closer to the neck, he was able to get those overdriven sounds, those harmonics.
The riff itself is quite a simple riff. It's a strange descending chromatic sound. Live, he used to punctuate that with some harmonics on the. There's all sorts of strange passages in Dazed. There's that little, which always reminds me of Paranoid, Black Sabbath. It always sounds a very similar riff.
When the album came out, it was definitely the track that I think people focused on very quickly as being something very new and different, and again, very much part of the future.
If you had to pick a song that maybe hasn't held up quite as well as the others, maybe you'd go for Your Time Is Gonna Come. I mean, it's a slightly gospel-y flavour to it, almost. It's a nice track. I don't know if it's necessarily one that, you know, if Page and Plant and John Paul Jones were going to tour again tomorrow, obviously with another drummer, I don't think that's a song necessarily everyone would be clamouring to hear.
Your Time Is Gonna Come, I think, is one of the highlights for John Paul Jones. John Paul was a great arranger as well as a fantastic musician. He was somebody who knew how to add colour and even orchestral colour to other people's records. That was part of his gig as a session musician. And in this, you've got an introduction that's played on the organ. Now, normally on a blues rock record, it would be a Hammond organ, but the sound here is much more like a chorale played on a church organ. It owes as much to Bach as it owes to Jimmy Smith. And it's something that he brought in there that's just a flash of colour that's coming from somewhere else and really adds to the whole mix.
You've got two amazing frontmen in the group. You've arguably got an amazing third frontman in the drummer. Here is the guy who's the glue that holds it all together. So he was, you know, kind of an eminence gris in a way. You know, he didn't draw attention to himself in the obvious ways. But just as with the others, without him, there couldn't have been any Led Zeppelin.
In the chemistry of it, he's a little bit underplayed. Always has been, as we know. But I think on Zep 1, without his assurity, it probably wouldn't have flowed as well.
I think Jimmy saw what he did and what Led Zeppelin did as very much not just in the tradition of, but tapping into textures and not just the music but the spirit of the music that other artists had already gone ahead of him to try, and he was following them and trying to take the journey one step further.
Well, again, in the scheme of things, in borrowing a few bits and pieces. This was based on a Bert Jansch track. He was a folk sort of guitarist in the early 60s who Jimmy admired quite a lot. He did a track called Black Waterside, which had a very similar riff, I have to say, to that track. But what Jimmy did, he brought in tabla drums, he made it an Indian type sound, which again was something that would forge itself much later in things like Kashmir, and he had a special guitar tuning. He called it CIA, Celtic Arabic Indian, which he sort of thought of and used again many times, not least with Kashmir much later. But what you get in there is, again, even though he borrowed bits and pieces, it came out sounding something very new. And Bert Jansch's track, albeit that it's the core of the tune, did not sound like Black Mountainside that came out on Z1.
Putting an instrumental there at that point in the running order is a brave thing to do. You know, with what's gone before it and what comes after it, it's a sort of, you know, it takes a very brave producer to put an instrumental at that point.
Communication Breakdown, I think, is like it's the first heavy metal song. If you listen to it, it's a Black Sabbath Paranoid is completely kind of rips off from it, intentionally or otherwise. We don't know. What it is, it's just insane though, because it doesn't go on as long as everything else. It just kind of comes in, makes its point, and then gets out again.
A lot of people claim that it's the first heavy metal song. I'm not so sure. I think, you know, Ray Davies has got a few words about what the first heavy metal song is. Pete Townsend has got a few words about it as well. But, oh, this was just... We'd never heard the like of this before.
Hey girl, stop what you're doing. Hey girl, you drive me to ruin. I don't know what it is about you that I like such a lot. But I know, baby, that you got a lot, and that's what I want. Communication breakdown, it's always the same. Having a nervous breakdown drive me insane.
What you got with Communication Breakdown is something that Page was extremely good at and would get obviously well known for. He could build a song around a repeated guitar riff very easily, and it would be infectious, you know, and that is a good example. 2.5 minutes, bang, pure energy. Plant completely immersed in the song. You know, he gets to that piece where he goes, "Suck it," and then Page comes in with guitar. It's an iconic moment in early Led Zeppelin history. You know, it just stands out as being such a passionate statement, and they were tremendously good at that, and they obviously would get better at it.
Communication Breakdown is an exocet missile in sound. It just gets crazier and crazier. I have no idea what it's about, but it just tears the place up. It's an incredible little performance, and I don't know where it came from, but I'm glad it did.
you to think about the good things in life. And I want you to put your hands together for the good things.
I think there's something about How Many More Times it works as a sort of grand finale, if you like. You've got this great kind of slow walking blues line from John Paul Jones at the beginning. And it's another track that just builds. You know, by the time you're quite exhausted by the time you get to the end of it. So I think it's probably the idea.
How Many More Times became not just the end of the first album, but the crescendo to the whole show in those days. It would just go on and build and build. A very simple rhythm, a very simple blues idea, but by the time they'd finished it, they'd wrung every bit of juice right out of it. It's one of those songs that when it ends, it always sounds as if it's ended a bit too early. But when you look at your watch, you realise, you know, it's been 20 minutes now and maybe it was the time to end it.
How Many More Times, when it was recorded, had a basic track, which was the basic tune, which, you know, they'd come up with. On the night of recording it, they went into other things. You know, Albert Lee's track, you know, is in there, you know, The Hunter. Oh, Rosie's in there, which is an old blues tune that just came out on the night. And that was what they were good at, particularly early on with that track. And that is how they would close the act. And it became quite, you know, an epic statement. But it didn't happen until the night of recording it. They didn't know they were going to do it. And this is the spontaneous ethic that Zeppelin had from the start. You know, here's a track, this is how we play it tonight, but it may not be how we play it tomorrow night. And that came in to the studio in Zepp 1 with that track, which I think was why it's such an epic closing statement.
I'd like to introduce Led Zeppelin to you. On bass guitar, John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones. On drums, John Bonham. Lead guitar, Jimmy Page. And myself, Robert Plant.
You know, you could argue that the second Zeppelin album subsequently overshadowed the first, but without the first, there could be no second. You know, they'd been together less than 3 weeks when they made that first album. They did it in 30 hours for less than £2,000. They did it not using a computer or any advanced recording techniques particularly. They did it just playing together in a room and taping it.
Cream had just broken up. There are people that say that you know, we took over that position. Because there wasn't too much room about then. I seem to remember. Once Cream had broken up, we were left out there, you know. And we came up with the goods, it seems.
And we all knew then that this thing, no matter how it was exposed to people, primarily when you play music, you've got to please yourself. You know, you can't look at the chart or whatever it is and say, I've got to be there for that reason. And we knew this thing that we got here would kind of clear a lot of crap out of the way. It was like a big hammer going.
Robert's not actually credited as writing lyrics on this album because he had a publishing deal that fell over from before. But in fact, that doesn't mean to say he wrote all the lyrics, because he didn't. I wrote quite a lot of lyrics at this point as well.
Oh yeah, I was pretty green, you know. I mean, I didn't know which fork to use when, but who cares? It didn't matter. You know, it was our contribution that counted.
Well, when we started the band, I know what I wanted to do. I wanted to make music which was really that people would respect, and I knew it was good, but I hadn't got the faintest idea that it was ever going to become as big as what it did. Obviously, I mean, but I hadn't even thought or wished it to. I think the only thing I wanted to do was to do something which could stand the test of time.